Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Richard Choi. I'm the head of hybrid cloud pre-sales at Ultima Business Solutions, and I'll be your host today in this session. We're very delighted to be joined by Mark Grant, a data protection specialist from Rubrik, to share his expertise today. Actually, Mark, did you want to give a quick introduction about yourself?
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Really looking forward to the session today. Lovely to have a chat about this subject, actually. Very topical, I'd say. So yeah, my role within Rubrik is I work in a team called Rubrik X. X, typically when someone puts X against something in an organization, it typically means it's like incubation, innovation, and that's pretty much it. So we kind of pick up newer areas, yeah, around what we're going to be doing going forward at Rubrik. So looking at the market, making the right acquisitions, let's say, and then bringing products to market. And they tend to sit in my team for a good couple of years while we kind of incubate and develop that. So, yeah, at the moment, I'm very focused on identity, but I've been with the company for 4 years and historically kind of had a focus on 365 protection, cloud protection. But yeah, identity is very much where the action is at the moment, where the challenges are. So that's very much my focus for today, I think. But yeah, look forward to discussing it.
Great. And I think in today's talk, we'll examine where, traditional backups, where they fall short, where those
Yeah.
hidden risks are, like you were talking about identity in particular, and
Mm.
how a modernized security first approach with Rubrik,
Yeah.
coupled with Ultima's 30 years of experience in the business, can help customers, I guess. So
Yeah.
just to set the scene a little bit, Mark, very interested to hear your view around well, there's a lot of news on ransomware. And I think when I speak to customers, everyone says they have backups. But why do breaches and ransomware really cripple organizations? And why are many not able to recover?
Yeah, I guess we're seeing an evolution in terms of the attack vectors and we've seen that in combination with, I think, a lot of investment and actually rightly, investment in proactive tools to try and stop these attacks happening, but probably a little bit of an imbalance, I think, when it comes to resilience and recovery. So it's the kind of, I guess, the ability of the bad guys now to use methods to now get around some of those proactive defense mechanisms have started to cause, I think, more issues. Historically, yeah, absolutely. I mean, even at Rubrik, we were probably doing 2 to 3 ransomware recoveries a week. So we've got our own ransomware recovery team. Yeah, we've got 7,000 customers. So we're kind of helping customers recover and that we're doing that regularly. But absolutely, we've seen a pretty dramatic escalation in recent months. And I think, yeah, like I say, the problem we're seeing is kind of the type of attack. So pretty much now I'd say 8 out of 10 attacks we're seeing are targeting the identity environment as kind of that's the gate they're trying to get through. But then once they get through that, they're being incredibly destructive as we've seen, encrypting data, locking out identities, getting access to critical business systems, slowing down or even stopping production, as we've seen recently with the poor people over at Jaguar Land Rover, which is really, really challenging. And Marks and Spencers and others we're all very, very aware of. The real issue that I've seen in terms when it comes to recovery are kind of three key things, actually, Richard. The first thing is the backups that were put in place, particularly for things like Active Directory. We see this the same when it comes to data across on-prem, cloud, 365. But a lot of the backups are put in some time ago. The backups are really designed for the DR world. Though, so pre-cyber, everybody was very focused on disaster recovery or operational recovery, and that's really where those backups were put in many, many years ago, right? For the right reasons, by the way. The real challenge that I've seen is obviously that as cyber has grown and grown and grown, they're now able to cause major problems for those backups. So interestingly, Richard, nearly all attacks we've seen recently and actually over the last few years, one of the first things that they do is try and delete the backups. Right? And I get it. If I was an attacker and I want to cause maximum harm to an organization, Richard, I want to debilitate the company's very ability to recover. So because some of these backup environments are co-located in their production environment or based upon virtual machines, let's say, so they're based upon VM technology. Yeah, unfortunately, we're seeing those backups get blitzed, effectively get taken down, and that's where we're seeing these very prolonged recovery processes. The second thing where I think, Richard, we're seeing challenges is if your backups did survive, let's say. So let's just say actually they don't get to the backups, your backups are still there. Trying to ascertain a clean point of recovery is a real challenge.
Mm.
And by that, I mean, understanding that the vulnerability that's caused you harm is almost definitely going to be in your backups. You're taking backups every single day. If you look at all these recent attacks, Richard, goodness, what are they, sort of 30, 40, 50-day gestation periods before they detonate? So it's going to be in your backups. Now, if you recover and you don't have the ability to ascertain where the threat is within the backups, you and I know that's only going to come back into production, and you're going to go round and round and round trying to find the ransomware in your backups. So again, a lot of these kind of legacy backup systems, one, they're not surviving. Two, they're not able to kind of ascertain the blast radius of an attack within the backups, give a clean point of recovery. And then the third bit is, and let's just focus on identity here because that's the main focus of the session today. I'm seeing lots of organizations where they can recover their domain controllers, maybe with a legacy backup system or a modern backup system, but they can recover their domain controllers. But we're seeing this very elongated process when it comes to the forests. So if your forest, remember you've got domains and you've got forests within your AD structures, the forest process, Richard, is a very complex, I'd say elongated process. It's about 120-page document you've got to go through from Microsoft. It's about 20 steps, but conservative, I would say, to do a full forest recovery per forest, you're looking at sort of 48 hours to do that. If you've got multiple forests, obviously, again, that's elongating that recovery process. So the forest piece is a bit of a problem we've seen. And then the other one, which is the one that's kind of surprised us a bit, but is a real challenge actually, is Entra ID. So you've got nearly all organizations, Richard, have got obviously Active Directory, and then they've also gone with Entra. So they're effectively a hybrid identity environment. And you've got things like AD Connect, I think it's called Entra Sync now, actually, which connects both AD and Entra. Now, the problem we've seen acutely on Entra, Richard, is you really can't recover some of those aspects of it. One, the server, and it's not Microsoft's fault here. They make it very clear in the shared responsibility matrix so that they don't have a responsibility for backup. So what you get is retention. You get 30 days retention. Problem with the elongated detonation of attacks we've seen recently, but you cannot recover the settings, the policies, and the configurations. So things like your apps, your app registrations, your conditional access policies, they actually cannot be recovered within that process. So you've got to rebuild those from scratch. So, I see lots of organizations, Richard, have got hundreds, if not thousands of enterprise apps. They've got Workday and 365 and Salesforce. You've got to then reconnect all of those different connections. You've got to wrap the policies back around that, and then you've got to do that recovery. So there are real challenges around AD, not really. It's AD, obviously having the forest and the forest being a long time to recover, and then acutely seeing, Entra being, the pretty much no backup anywhere, and it being very slow and painful to do that recovery. So we're seeing those three things as I'd say the real challenges that most organizations are facing at the moment.
Yeah, that probably coincides with what we're seeing as well. And like you say, identity, get the keys to the kingdom, then you can do whatever you want. And like you say, it's very intricate in the way that you have to recover. So that's leading to longer recovery times, right? And in some instances, I think we've seen customers that they do away with the old and actually rebuild everything new. And that causes a whole load of different problems. And I think aside from the technical aspect as well, I find a lot of the challenges with organizations are with probably a little bit non-related technical things. Like first thing is like always budget constraint is a real problem. We speak to many architects, IT managers and all that. They're being given to handle a small budget, and it just doesn't fit this new emerging threat. So trying to appeal and explain to them so they can create a business case to go further up in the board is important. And I think previous years there's that lack of focus, right? But now, like you're saying, more and more of this stuff is getting into the press, so people getting, it's a very high profile thing, right? And last thing I'd say is like for the forever changing landscape in security and these threats, right? The lack of skills is quite important
Huge.
because, like you say, everyone's got the legacy backup. They can recover
Yeah,
data from a hard fault, but this, soft, I suppose, cyber threat where it comes in and infiltrates and
yeah,
attacks you in a different way. Not
yeah.
everyone's has the expertise to deal with that. So, yes,
Exactly.
really interesting to hear your views on that. And yeah, I wanted to kind of hone in a little bit on identity, but we kind of talked a little bit about that. I guess, yeah, attackers go straight for the data first, and uh, yeah, why is it such a problem? I mean, that identity links back into the backup environment, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah, I always talk about the house. If you have a house, you have foundations. People know that. Yeah, identity are foundations. The house kind of falls down without those foundations. So, identity underpins pretty much everything, and it's an interesting kind of evolution what we've seen over the last 10 years. Obviously, Active Directory was the fundamental way that people used to, set out their identities, and that was very much focused in an on-prem world.
mm,
And that's still there, right? And I think that's still going to be there for many years. But more and more now we're seeing cloud services and SaaS services start to dominate, and also custom development as being, from organizations, and a lot of those new applications and services are pinned to kind of Entra, which is the key and fundamental way that organizations do that. So it's a classic paradox, Richard, of, you know, they've always had a backup for AD, but kind of as it's moved over to Entra and Microsoft are providing that service, the same principles that you would put in place for your AD environment have not really been put in place for Entra. So it's a really challenging situation. We actually ironically saw this a lot. I saw this a lot with M365. It was, Microsoft have got our backs, and it's like people didn't really look at the shared responsibility matrix and actually what Microsoft are responsible for. Again, no criticism of Microsoft. They make it really clear. So I saw this it's almost identical situation with their 365, and we've seen exactly that play out again with Entra. Just not the same level of due diligence, this kind of presumption that Microsoft will be there to recover the backups. Obviously, they'll
yeah,
do best effort only, but there's no guarantees and no responsibility there. And I think that's been a little bit of a miscalculation I've seen very consistently. And then being honest with you, the way the attackers are consistently getting through, yeah, it's a problem. So we're seeing two different types of attacks, Richard, which is why it's being effective. You've got the very, very well publicized, I call it dark arts, which is a manipulation of an individual to kind of, get username credentials, get password access.
yeah,
The
the
really
social
scary
engineering
thing.
aspect, isn't it? Yeah,
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 the really scary thing we're seeing is they're getting around things like MFA now. So they're able to use things like SIM swapping or, deep fakes. Yeah, which I think is going to be, by the way, I think that's going to be a bigger problem as we go forward. Some of the deep fakes out there to kind of trick you into giving, information you wouldn't normally give are a huge problem now. So there's that social engineering side of things, and then we're also seeing situations where the bad guys are effectively, they're getting huge numbers of usernames and passwords off the dark web, and then they're using kind of bot technologies to almost spray attack on organization.
mm,
And nearly always the attacks that we're seeing that are successful, they're kind of coming through the non-human identities. So you've got human identities and you've got non-human identities, Richard. And the problem that I've seen is that it's actually quite, with a human identity, if someone comes in, you kind of know fairly quickly if something's going on. With a non-human identity, like a bot, well, let's think about things like, Gen AI and Copilot. That's going to, all of those things are going to have AI agents are going to have their own identities. It becomes a little bit more problematic to see things as they manifest. And then they're getting in and they're typically going in straight for the domain controller. And then nearly all of these attacks, we're seeing them target something called the NTDS file, which is effectively the database that sits within Active Directory domain controllers with all the credentials. They take that offline, they crack that, they come back in, and then that's when they're going down, getting access to the network, getting access to the hypervisors and the VMs, and then being very destructive about how they delete that. So yeah, it's a real problem because I think the way that they're attacking now, the way they're getting around MFA means that, like I said, kind of alluded to at the start, it's going to be very, very difficult to continue to stop this happening. So you've got to have a defense and depth strategy. You've got to start focusing much, much more on resilience, recovery, and if that dark day comes, making sure you've done all the right preparation, you've got the right muscle memory to know exactly what to do. Everybody's got set roles and responsibilities, and you've got the recovery capabilities to ascertain very quickly and prioritize what you recover, and then go through that kind of, I would say, operational recovery process where you're almost thinking about bringing back the critical assets first, so identity first. Then you can start looking at, okay, what are the critical business services, Richard, I've got? How do I prioritize that within hours I bring back my identity and my critical business services? Then you've got to be pragmatic over days and weeks. You recover less important things, but because of the way these attacks are now manifesting and getting through, you have to have a plan there, and you have to have the technology to back that up and deliver for you. I think it's not an easy situation for organizations, but the technology is out there, Richard, right? We can
Yeah,
definitely help them.
I think
Yeah.
so. And I find this topic quite fascinating. And you're quite right.
Yeah.
I think when I jump on calls, maybe 8 to 9 times out of 10, I ask customers about M365.
Yeah.
M365 they're getting better at. They're
Yeah, they
understanding
are.
the backup, but Entra ID is the one missing link,
Okay.
and it's such a problem from the cyber security aspect. But I also think there's another point around, not having that backup. You've got the human error, misconfiguration
Totally.
way. You've got
Yeah.
the also internal sabotage. You might have a ex
Yeah.
disgruntled employee about to leave, admin. He or she can make a real havoc here by misconfiguring something. Even heard of a story where actually this was not sabotage, but more of a human error kind of thing, where someone had configured something incorrectly in conditional access terms, and
Yeah.
because everyone works remotely and cloud is remote to you, right? They'd accidentally locked themselves out. And I
Yeah.
suppose one way to look at this is like having that protected is like you could recover to a point in time to regain access, which
Yeah.
is quite a thing that I never thought about until I saw that incident. So yeah, I think it's very important to be considering identity and
Yeah.
having that protected and recoverable as well.
Yeah.
I suppose if we just switch gears a little bit about
Yeah.
talking a little bit on the real world scenarios, I'm sure a lot of the listeners and audience would like to hear maybe if you can share some example of when identity was an attack vector and how Rubrik kind of helped the organization recover. Yeah, some I'm sure there's some stories you can share as well. Yeah.
Yeah, one particular one a couple of weeks ago, actually. Again, no names. It's because it's not fair, right? But a very high profile in the press attack that happened but the best way to put it is to a telco company. Yeah, I was in Dublin with my family actually on a Saturday. Believe it or not, actually getting ready to watch Oasis. So I took my daughter's now, she's 20, and my wife, we got tickets and we thought we'd go for Dublin for the weekend, have a lovely weekend in Dublin, watch Oasis. So I admit I'd probably had a Guinness, I think, at the time. And we'd actually met this particular organization, and this particular organization had some protection with us, but not for M365 and not for Entra ID and AD. I'd actually spoken to them probably a week before, around this very subject that we're talking about today. So they were aware of the challenges, the problems, and they were actually looking to do something around it. So the call on the Saturday was a bit of a shock. I ran back to the office. I was told I need to immediately get on a call with that company, with a group of people from Rubrik on a Saturday afternoon, and they had an attack. Actually, it came through SharePoint on-prem. So I think there was a recent vulnerability, well publicized one for SharePoint on-prem, kind of cascaded over to Entra, into AD. And we had to react incredibly quickly to try and help them. It's a very unusual situation because normally, Richard, we'd have a backup and then our backup, our ransomware response team would kick in. We'd immediately work with the customer. We'd work with Microsoft as a tri-party, and we would start the recovery process about, how do we make sure throttling's turned off by Microsoft? How do we start to instigate that recovery process? So this was very, very different. So immediately we had to then go, okay, yeah, we could take a backup very quickly because they had no idea how far the attack had gone within 365 and Entra. So we had to do that very, very quickly. And effectively, by that day, we instigated the setting up of trying to back up their 365 and their Entra ID environment. That were the first two things we decided we would do immediately. So the attack was ongoing, but again, we didn't know if they detonated. We didn't know how far. So by the next mornings, by Sunday morning, we'd already backed up Entra ID for them. So we secured that within a matter of hours. We then, to be frank, it does take a little bit of time. It takes a good few days to kind of fully back up. They have a very large M365 environment. We have the ability to kind of back up that over the next couple of days. Then once we've got the backup, we've got capability within the Rubrik product to start to scan. Yeah. So we actually, Richard, we work with Mandiant. So we partner with Mandiant here. So with Mandiant, we can take thousands of feeds every single time we take a backup, and we can start looking within the backups for IOCs, for threats. So we can immediately ascertain for the organization, one, where is the blast radius attack? What was the threat? What sensitive data has been impacted by that attack? And give them that clean point of recovery within their backup. So that was a very, very unusual scenario. Obviously, we kind of successfully helped them, and they're well on their way to recovering now, which is great news. But there are many other aspects that could have been affected by that attack. But I think it starts to show the real world examples about how quickly these attacks are manifesting. And in that case it was retrospective, but the situations that are being thrown at us, Richard, I've been here for 4 years. We've never seen this. Typically, we're not used to having calls on a Saturday asking us to desperately pretty quickly back up services that we're not currently backing up, right? Because they're in the middle of a ransomware attack. And I can tell you, Richard, that's happened twice. So within the last couple of months. So yeah, it's pretty scary what's going on. But again, I think what I'm hopefully getting across is that with the right backup capabilities, if you've got the right recovery capabilities and you've got an organization like Rubrik to kind of help, we can, it's still painful, don't get me wrong. It's still a horrible process to go through, but at least we can get things scanned, we can get things recovered very quickly. We can even prioritize, how you want to recover. So the art of the possible is there, but yeah, it's just making sure you've got the appropriate capabilities to kind of support you in that time.
I agree, and it almost sounds like the intricate part. I mean, backup technology has existed for a very long time. I think
Yeah,
the real differentiator that I can see in the last few years is right, the tool set to detect, and like you say,
totally,
when
totally.
ransomware's hit you, you need to be able to operate and find out where that point was, and what maybe some of the data you've got is good, some of this is bad, and trying to pinpoint that
Yeah,
accelerates the recovery times that is really needed, isn't it, in
yeah,
this form
yeah.
of attack?
I,
Um,
just to comment on that, Richard, I couldn't agree more. I think there's two things here, right? There's that which as you expect, I categorically agree with. The other bit is you got to have your backups not based upon Windows. No offense, but if your backups are based upon Windows technology, yeah, it's not ideal. So the way that we've also done it, just to kind of add to that, Richard, is we the Rubrik technology is built upon a hardened Linux environment. I'm touching wood, we've never had a situation where our backups have been destroyed or we haven't been able to recover the data that we back up for a customer. So look hard, even if this is probably a message to go out there, even if you have existing backups, double down, look at the underlying architecture, make sure that your architecture is resilient. If it's based upon Windows, question that. If it's not air gapped, question that. These things I think I've seen recently can be catastrophic, right? So these are things also to consider, I'd say, as well, Richard.
yeah, that's kind of reminded me another thing that I learned recently. I've been doing a lot of studying in backup technology and also the cost to protect as well.
Yeah.
One thing that was very apparent to me, and I won't call out any names, but
Yeah.
there's been a lot of customers moving to public cloud and using public cloud native tooling on a small scale seems to be okay, but when you scale that up, it often is. It kind of leaves you less protected with the
Yeah.
rubrics of the world where your real expertise in backup protection and detection, right? But also the cost to store all these things where you don't have the native, well, technologies
Yeah.
that you guys have to, store the data,
Tear
deduplicate,
down.
compress, all that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's another angle here. There's security, but there's also, the cost
Cost savings.
savings is quite immense as well.
Yeah,
Um,
couldn't agree more.
I'm going to move over to another topic around governance and compliance a little bit.
Yeah.
I suppose we get a lot where customers asking about proof of recoverability. How do you kind of show your board members in the organization or regulators that risks are being handled and identified and everything's under control? Yeah, it's that confidence piece, really. Yeah.
Yeah, two aspects for you here, Richard. Actually, one very, very new and one we've had for a little bit of time.
Mm,
So one of the great things that you can do with Rubrik, and again, an area that where I've seen real issues is constant. And one of the things I always tell organizations when I speak to them is test, test, test. Like, test to death. Make sure that you have categoric confidence that you can recover. It could be identity, to be frank, it could be data, right? But test that you can recover that. If you don't have the ability and the muscle memory and almost the evidence that that you, particularly for your identity services and your critical applications, that you can meet set recovery times by regulators, etc., you're in a big world of pain, right? So, within the Rubrik platform, we can absolutely do that. And it's interesting, Richard, right? Most organizations I meet, look, I meet organizations that have told me they do test AD every single month, and that's amazing, right? So they test their recovery process and they do that regularly, but that's so rare. Most organizations I meet, Richard, they test probably once a year, maybe twice a year, because it's actually really difficult. AD also links into your kind of your primary environment. The last thing you want is to cause problems with your primary environment. So unless you've got a test environment, it can be very problematic to actually test and do that. So the first thing is with Rubrik is that whether it's AD or Entra or 365 or cloud or on-prem, you can absolutely regularly test, validate, prove out, show the regulators, show the board, yes, we can recover our critical services. Here's our RTOs, here's our RPOs, here's the proof that we can do that. And also, our team then has the confidence of knowing exactly what they need to do. And when that dark day comes, they're ready and they're prepared. So that kind of element to it. And then within the product itself, you've got loads of reporting and compliance capabilities to evidence that as well. Yeah. The next bit is the new bit. So this is very, very new. And literally, I'd say we probably launched this product, no more than sort of 4 or 5 weeks ago. Is we're moving not away from backup and recovery, because that's an absolute fundamental for Rubrik, right? But we're also starting to look and develop products around what we call proactive resilience and risk reduction.
mm,
So we've released a product called Identity Resilience, which sits in the same platform as our cyber recovery capabilities, which I talked about. But to your point, Richard, what that does is that's starting to look at the live environment across your identity. So it's scanning
mm,
and giving you information about all your human, your non-human identities. Absolutely. It starts to show you any misconfigurations, any elevated privileges that have been given to an individual that haven't been taken down. That happens a lot. Any misconfigurations. We can monitor things like group policies. We can even roll back group policies. So along with the backups now, we have the capability to start to work proactively to help an organization then, proactively look at their live environment, start to look at where those issues are, and I would say shrink and reduce that risk.
mm,
Because again, to be candid, the last thing we want is someone pressing the big red button to do a recovery. If we can help reduce the risk, the chances of having to do a big red button recovery are less. Yeah.
mm,
The other thing that we just announced alongside of that, and you'll see more of this actually over the next couple of weeks, Richard, is we partner with CrowdStrike. So CrowdStrike have very good proactive detection capabilities across identity. We can actually take feeds now from CrowdStrike and then remediate things that CrowdStrike, because they'll look at the signaling, let's say, and what's going on within the identity environment. They could then feed that back to Rubrik, and we can roll back and change some of those misconfigurations, let's say, or group policy changes. We will also announce further, I would say, integrations with some very significant players in that space very, very soon. But yeah, I think you need that. Our view is, to your point, you need that combination of categoric recovery capability in a prioritized way, and absolutely making sure that you can recover, coupled with the proactive detection, risk reduction,
mm.
good posture, I would say, across identity. And I think the lane that we're going to stay in here is good. We're not trying to be a CrowdStrike or trying to be a Microsoft Defender for identity. We're really going to work with those kind of ecosystem providers to then take feeds and do things. So very good question. That's something we're taking enormously seriously at Rubrik, and obviously we've now developed a capability there that we're starting to showcase and show clients.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, testing is fundamental to
Yeah,
increasing your confidence, and more organizations are looking at confidence and ticking off the boxes for cyber insurance and passing cyber essentials plus things like
exactly.
that.
Yeah,
And there was a thing I read was quite interesting. I think you guys were one of the first in the market to offer some form of guarantee around this, and obviously that
yeah,
helps with the confidence as well, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We back it up with a warranty. I think it's $5 million for certain workloads. So yeah, absolutely. With our technology, with that, again, we've never had a situation, again, touching wood, where we've lost customer data or not been able to recover and had a bad act to get access to our backup. So we've got that level of confidence. We back it up with a huge warranty,
Yeah.
and I'm still very confident we'll never have to pay that, just based upon the architectural brilliance that the guys put together when they started the company. Right? It was you. The bit where we're so confident is, I can't emphasize this enough. It's a bit, Richard, it's a bit lucky as well, right?
Mm.
We came to market 10 years ago, at a time when cyber was just getting started. So the brilliant thing that the founders at Rubrik, Bickle and the team did, and Nitro did, was they designed our product from the ground up for cyber and for DR. So that's the kind of a little bit of good fortune, but that's the brilliance where those guys said, this is going to be a future problem. It's going to grow. We need to have these kind of, let's say, founding principles of our product, which can make it cyber resilient. So that's why we're so uber confident when it comes to these things.
Great. I think it's the final segment really now,
Yeah,
and as we end the session, I've got one final point and summary really, and it sounds like backups aren't just about data; it's about identity, security, and resilience. In Ultima, for many customers, we offer this backup and DR assessment, which is complementary service to help identify gaps and give them, actionable recommendations to de-risk their environment and all that. I suppose same question to your side. What kind of things can you help customers expose gaps if they wanted to find out a bit more about Rubrik and where the, maybe risks are?
yeah. We obviously do lots of different sessions with clients around everything from detecting their or questioning around, their current state and, improvements they can make, very much aligned to this conversation. But I can't emphasize enough this. We do this thing called, well, it used to be called Save the Data. We've just updated it as well to now include identity, actually. But this is nothing to do with Rubrik almost. It's almost a simulation, right, of a real world ransomware attack where everybody takes responsibility and roles. And we walk through a real cyber attack and the different roles you have to take on, the different considerations. It's really, really interesting. Someone who's been in this, working for Rubrik for 4 years. When I first did it, look, and I know the problems, I know the issues. I work for Rubrik every single day, but even I was surprised at the just how challenging going through a real world ransomware attack is. I remember watching. Actually, she was brilliant. The lady, I think sadly she's left, and I can kind of get that. The lady that ran Co-op, right? She ran the infrastructure at Co-op, and she was on BBC Breakfast News, and she gave a brilliant interview after the Co-op attack around what that was to the business, how she tried to work through that, and she made really, really kind of she made a comment that really got to me. Actually, she said they asked her, and you can watch this, it's still on the BBC website somewhere. They asked her about what was it like that first day, and I think she said when she walked in the room, she'll never ever forget the look on the faces of the guys as they were trying to kind of defend this attack. It was like, yeah, it took a human cost. So that human cost is still going to be tough, right? But that human cost can be helped enormously if you do proper preparation. And I think understanding what happens, understanding the prep, the planning you have to do, going through simulations where everybody's got an appreciation of that. Honestly, it helps enormously. So these things we run regularly. I would highly advise, if you want to look at that, you can reach out to Ultima and obviously us, and we're happy to come in and run those sessions with you. The other thing I'd say out of that is quite interesting. Usually the infrastructure teams and the security teams, they know enough, right? They don't know everything, but they know enough. it's so important for the business people to get involved in that as well, because they're usually the people, obviously, who make the financial decisions about investment. And sometimes they don't always have, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, they don't always have the detailed appreciation about just how horrible it can be to do this type of recovery. So bringing the kind of infrastructure, the security, and the business people in these sessions, yeah, I think it illuminates everybody, and it gives everybody a better chance to kind of consider things, prepare better. And again, we're not selling anything in that session. We're just kind of educating and trying to help organizations be better prepared. So long-winded, but hopefully you kind of get you kind of get what we do and how we help, Richard.
Yeah, sounds like a great way to find out if
Really
you're
is.
not sure about your environment, how at risk it is. I think that's it. And yeah, thanks very much, Mark, for your time. And thanks for everyone listening. Yeah, and that's it. Goodbye.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.